like YouTube is still spinning. Hopefully. Oh, there we go. Now we're live. So good afternoon. Thank you guys for joining me for yet another lunchtime live stream. Today I've got this rapidly melting brookie brownie and cookie ice cream. So I want to get it out of this dang container as quickly as possible. If I can. Come on. There we go. Nice and elegant way to extricate some chocolate ice cream out of a container. This is my lunch for today, so I hope you guys are settling in. I hope you have something to enjoy for lunch for yourselves. We are at the end of yet another week. I think this is number 60 for the live streams. That means I've been live streaming every single weekday for, believe it or not, for 12 weeks. Oh my goodness, has it been that long? It doesn't seem like it, but I guess on the other hand, this whole lockdown thing does seem like it's been going on for about 20 years by now, so I am pretty much fed up with everything being closed, no flights, travel being restricted. I don't even think that people can cross the American-Canadian border right now, which is kind of a drag. Luckily, nobody can stop the airwaves. Nobody can stop the internet from getting through. So thankfully, I've still got everybody on both sides of the border from all over the world able to tune in. You guys are still able to catch up with YouTube. And a couple of days ago, the last couple of days this week, I've noticed a lot of email messages going around about this thing, Juneteenth, which is a new holiday. Not a new holiday. It is a holiday that is new to me. It's something that I've never heard of, so I thought it'd be kind of cool to dig in and see exactly what Juneteenth is about. While enjoying myself some chocolate and cookie dough ice cream. So, out of curiosity, I don't know how many folks... actually, I can check my YouTube stats to see how many people... what the demographics are for this channel, and I can see how many folks are in the United States, how many folks are abroad, get kind of a breakdown for what the audience is. Let me see if I can find that really quick, because it is actually pretty interesting. Ooh, here we go. Here we go. Money. So everybody who has a YouTube channel, who has a certain number of subscribers, I think as you get more subscribers, you get access to different bits and bobs and different statistics and stuff. And this shows my breakdown of folks who see me by their geography, where they're watching from. And it's pretty cool to see that, let me see, by view count, 57% of folks are in the United States. So that's pretty high. And then we've got folks from Canada, the UK, from Argentina, from the Dominican Republic. Let me see. 0 people from Saudi Arabia are watching me, so there's that. Got 22 views from Italy. Yes! 25 views from Mexico, 27 from the Philippines, everything like that. So it is pretty cool to see that folks from all over the world are able to tune in. I'm very glad about that. YouTube is not globally available. It's not available in some countries around the world. I think that's mainly because of political things, stuff like that. I want to see how much of this ice cream I can actually eat today. So I have been dragging a little bit this morning. So I think getting a little bit of sugar and just a touch of caffeine from all that chocolate in this thing is going to help me out. So, given the current situation in the United States, all the protests and everything that have been happening, Black Lives Matter has been very prominent in the news. And this thing called Juneteenth kind of came to my attention, like I mentioned. So, if we roll back the clock way, way far to 1860, this is where everything actually starts with this whole thing. Now, in 1860 was when Abraham Lincoln was elected president. And, Abraham Lincoln, for folks who are outside of the state, you might not know quite as much about American history. And I am definitely no expert when it comes to history. I'm way more knowledgeable about STEM field stuff, sciences, biology, medicine, that kind of thing. So when it does come to history, I'm definitely not an expert. I just look this stuff up online. I'm more of like a Wikipedia level of expertise when it comes to this kind of stuff. So anyway, roll back the clock to 1860. This was back when America, half of America anyway, ostensibly half of America. I think it was more like maybe a quarter of America or so. A couple of states, the southern states, used slavery, basically. They enslaved Africans, black individuals were enslaved in America and forced to, forced onto labor camps. I'm not going to belabor that, mostly because, I don't know, it's an uncomfortable subject, and I just don't know enough about it to do it justice. But in 1860, that was when Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and one of the things that he's most well known for is his Emancipation Proclamation for freeing the slaves, everything along those lines. And if you dig into it, like the actual history around 1860 to 1865 is just bonkers. Like, it is absolutely madhouse. I mean, if you were making a Hollywood movie, this is the kind of stuff that you would put in a Hollywood movie, really. I mean, so, interesting fact, Abraham Lincoln, up to the point of the election and his whole campaign, was based around creating this new political party that was specifically meant to abolish slavery. At least that's basically what it was. If you look at his first inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address, he does go on to say that he has no intention to change the institution of slavery in the southern states of America, but of course that is definitely not the case. So when Abraham Lincoln was elected president, there was a whole lot of upheaval, and the minority of the population of the United States actually seceded. So the United States actually broke apart into two different countries, which is really absolutely insane in my mind. Like, to see that over a political activity in the United States of America caused this kind of upheaval, where the states actually split into two. And shortly after that, shortly after Abraham Lincoln was elected president, was when the Civil War in America actually began. Let me see if I can find an exact date for that. So I've got this fact sheet open, which is basically like a really brief rundown of the Civil War in the United States. So it happened from 1861. It ended in 1865, which is shortly after Abraham Lincoln's second inauguration, when he was elected to president for a second term. You see, some of these numbers are just gigantic. So there were 2.1 million Union soldiers and 1 million Confederate soldiers engaged in this war. And look at this, like a quarter or a third of the individuals who were engaged in this war were casualties, which is just insane, like giant amounts of numbers. So the Union was the North, and the Confederate was the South. The Confederate were the folks who were, they were slaveholders. They wanted to, there's lots of reasons that people say the American Civil War began, but if you dig into it, it's basically all around the slavery. So let's see, causes of secession. There's the speculation that, it must have been a territorial crisis, must have been about state rights and patriotism, everything along those lines. But I think everybody knows it was basically about the fact that the southern states were heavily dependent on their use of slavery, because their economy, their way of life, everything about the southern states was based around basically crops that required a lot of manual labor. And the only way that this manual labor was able to actually happen was with the use of slaves. I shouldn't say the only way that was able to happen, but it was basically like the easiest way for them to get it done, I guess. Like I said, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details. It's pretty bad. And I don't know enough about the details. Oh, Manic Tricks Woods, thank you for joining the chat, as well as Darnell Glenn. Thank you guys for joining the chat. Thank you everyone for joining the live stream today. It is a day that I don't even know. Well, of course we should be celebrating Juneteenth. I'll get to that in a little bit why. But it is like the whole subject is definitely not something that's a very cheery subject. You say that is exactly what my history teacher said. It was pretty much because of slavery. Yeah, basically, like there's all these like what's the right word for it? It's like a lot of people try to make like post hoc excuses for it, post hoc excuses for their patriotism and their loyalty to the Confederacy and things along those lines. And it is unfortunate that it is something that still happens today. Like I am really astounded that people today still really show their patriotism for the Confederate flag. And a lot of people point to the fact that a lot of World War II soldiers, American soldiers, fought under the Confederate flag, and like that can be true, and it can also be a bad thing. Like, I don't see that as a great excuse for remaining so patriotic, so nationalistic about this Confederacy, which was basically based around the idea that their economy required slaves, which is absolutely absurd. It was, considering any human life to be a thing, to be something to be traded, is just, yeah, it's just disgusting. I don't like it at all. Let me see here. Let me move on to Juneteenth. Okay, so moving along the timeline there, the Civil War began in 1861 with, let me see if I can get an exact date on that. I don't see an exact date. There we go. So the Civil War began on April 12th, 1861. Yeah, folks in the chat might be able to, like, speak up with some of the details that I'm missing here, because there's certainly way, way more to it. So yeah, it began in April 12th, 1861, shortly after the southern states seceded from the United States. Let's see, they became the Confederate States. That's not very good. And they actually, pardon me, they actually elected their own Southern president, Jefferson Davis. I don't know a whole lot about Jefferson Davis. What I do know, like the names that are a little bit more recognizable to me, are Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant, who were the Southern and Northern generals of the Army, respectively. Now, it is kind of important to realize that, the North were actually invading the South. Like they were imposing their will on another country, effectively at that time. So a lot of people who, say that modern military actions are unwarranted, that the American military should just stay out of other people's business, you got to realize that, like, in this time, the Northern military invaded the South, basically, to take it over and to make sure that slavery just could not exist in a country that was so close to the United States of America. And I don't think that there is anybody out there who would say that that is a particularly bad thing. So the South was a less populous country, and the North was more industrious. It was more populous. They had a larger army. Like, they had all the advantages, except that the South had the basically they had the home field advantage, and they were the people who were being aggressed upon. I don't know how to say that. They were the defenders in that war, maybe something along those lines. So fast forward a little bit to 2 years into 2 years into President Lincoln's first term in office. He decided to he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, there we go, which basically ordered on a federal level that slavery was illegal. And of course, since the southern states were at that time not even part of the United States, it wasn't technically something that was, legally binding for the southern states. But, the idea was that if the northern states, if the United States of America were able to basically usurp the southern states, then they would then slavery would become illegal in all of these states of the North American continent. North American continent? No, of course not. Then basically they would be part of the United States, and that federal law that regulated slavery would make it illegal. Man, I feel like I'm not super articulate today, so I do apologize about that. So, unfortunately, the Emancipation Proclamation, like I said, like I mentioned, it was signed. I believe it was like penned in 1861, and then it was signed into law in 1862. And even though it was signed into law, it didn't actually go into effect, like I said, because the southern states were basically another country for many, many years, for a couple of years after that. So during the Civil War, President Lincoln was actually reelected to his second term in 1864, and the American Civil War ended on May 9th, 1865. That was the official day that the Southern general, Robert E. Lee, surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. I don't know a ton about exactly what was going on there, like all the battles that were fought and everything along those lines. But shortly after that, the Emancipation Proclamation, basically the news went out to everybody, all of the southern states that slavery was illegal, and all African Americans who were enslaved, everyone who was enslaved, in fact, because not only African Americans were enslaved, but I shouldn't say African Americans even, just Africans who were enslaved definitely made up the majority of the individuals who were enslaved. There were also Native Americans. I believe some people even mentioned some Caucasian Americans were also enslaved, but I think they were just like very, very small minority. Now back then, we did not have live streaming, YouTube, electronic communication network where everybody could get this proclamation immediately. So it ended up that Galveston, Texas, was basically the last place that in America that got that got word of the Emancipation Proclamation, and that happened. So the last slaves were freed in America on June 19th, 1865, in Galveston, Texas, and thus is how Juneteenth. A portmanteau. I've never heard of that. Juneteenth is a portmanteau of June and 19th. And a portmanteau is a linguistic blend of words in which parts of multiple words or their phonemes are combined into a new word. Okay, great. So anyway, Juneteenth, also known as Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, Liberation Day, and Emancipation Day, is a holiday celebrating the liberation of those who had been held as slaves in the United States, originating in Texas. It is now celebrated annually on the 19th of June throughout the United States, with varying official recognition. Specifically, it commemorates the Union Army General Gordon Granger announcing the federal orders in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865, proclaiming that all peoples held as slaves in Texas were free. So that's basically what it is. And I think that it is a very joyous thing to celebrate. It is unfortunate that this is the kind of holiday that should be celebrated. Like if everything were peachy, then these kinds of celebrations just would not happen. And I think it is the kind of thing that we should definitely not sweep under the rug. It is a very uncomfortable thing to discuss, to talk about. And it is something, of course, with the current protests that are going on in America, it is something that is much more in the fore, something that people are much more aware of than they have been in the past. And in fact, if anybody watches Natter's channel, is Freak Eating on YouTube, you guys probably know him. He is a history teacher, so it's really interesting to see a lot of the stuff that he talks about on Facebook and his social media regarding history and everything like that. So big props to him. When I was in high school, when I was in middle school, I was not big into learning history, and I think that was definitely to my detriment. So this is just Wikipedia, by the way, nothing super special here. The Wikipedia page for Juneteenth. Cool stuff about ending the end of slavery in Texas, early celebrations. Let's see, do we have anything else cool here? Yeah, let's check. Recognition. So it is interesting that Juneteenth was not always recognized as something. Like I said, this is the first year that I have ever heard of this thing, Juneteenth. And I'm sure that this Wikipedia page is being updated very, very frequently now that it is in the fore. In fact, I think it would be fun to check something out. I'm going to log in. I think I can log in. Nope, maybe not. I rely way too much on password storage and that kind of thing. I guess I don't have a Wikipedia account. What do you know? Oh, I can just see a list of contributions. I thought there was some way that you could see... Oh, up top. There we go. I'm looking for view history. So let me see here. View history. Oh my goodness. Let me see how many of these I can see on a page at one time, because if I'm reading this correctly, all of these changes were made today. Yeah. Look at that. This thing has been changing constantly in the last few days. Go back before June 2020, and all of a sudden things were being changed much less frequently. But on today alone, it looks like there are, I don't know, more than 50 changes. I did have to expand this out to more than 50 to view just the huge number of changes that have been happening to this page. So very, very interesting to see that this thing is being updated in real time with new information, basically because I think everybody's so excited about it. Ooh, pardon me. All right, so recognition of Juneteenth varies across the United States. It is not recognized as by the federal government. Most states recognize it in some way, either as a ceremonial observance of a state holiday. Some designate it as a paid day off for state employees. Some cities have recognized it through proclamation, and a variety of employers have policies allowing employees to take the day off. Just like that, earlier this week, I saw that my boss canceled all of his meetings for today, specifically to celebrate Juneteenth. So I think it's awesome that this is becoming a little bit more well-known. Hopefully, I really feel like people who don't understand history are doomed to repeat it. I find that it is extremely baffling to me, some of the actions that people take nowadays, some of these sentiments that they have, and I do feel like it generally comes from a place of ignorance. Not particularly stupidity, not particularly malice, but just a not understanding the kinds of consequences that these actions can have. And, a lot of people, I feel like a lot of people in America today kind of take for granted that the United States is this incredible institution, which it absolutely is, but they do have to remember that it is an institution that has not been, the number one country for very long. It's only in the last several decades where America has been on top. Before that, before World War II, America was definitely not on top, just about at any metric you could possibly think of. And of course, when this happened, America had even split in two. So it's something that I think a lot of people need to recognize, that they definitely need to make sure they're not taking their advantages in America for granted. So let me see here. Yeah, when I read this earlier this morning, I can see this thing is changing and being updated very, very frequently. I'm already seeing many, many changes from what I read this morning. Let me see. There are only 3 states yet to legally recognize Juneteenth as either a state ceremonial holiday. These are Hawaii, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota proclaimed June 19th, 2020 as Juneteenth Day, spurring calls for it to be recognized annually, not just for 2020. Similarly, a couple of other countries or states are looking at celebrating Juneteenth just today. And I think it would be great to celebrate this as a national holiday because it is something that I think more people just need to be aware of. And it is just a couple of weeks before one of America's biggest patriotic holidays, Independence Day. So I think it goes very, very well with kind of like a summer of celebration things. Let me see. Celebrations. This holiday is considered the longest running African American holiday and has been called America's second Independence Day. Very, very accurate. I like that. It is often celebrated on the third Sunday of June. Historian Mitch Ketchum considers that celebrations at the end of slavery have three goals: to celebrate, to educate, and to agitate. Hopefully that last one will be removed eventually, but obviously people are still feeling like the ramifications of the enslavement of Africans and African Americans even to this day, which is very unfortunate. Let's see. Early celebrations consisted of baseball, fishing, and rodeos. African Americans were often prohibited from using public facilities in their celebrations, so they're often held in churches or near water. Celebrations were also characterized by elaborate large meals, people wearing their best clothes. It was common for former slaves and their descendants to make a pilgrimage to Galveston. As early festivals received news coverage, Janice Hume and Noah Arcanu, maybe I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. I'm sure I am. Pardon me. Considered that they served to assimilate African American memories within the dormant American story. Observance today is primarily in local celebrations. In many places, Juneteenth has become a multicultural holiday. Traditions include public readings of the Emancipation Proclamation, singing traditional songs such as Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Lift Every Voice and Sing, and reading of the works noted by African American writers such as Ralph Ellison, Maya Angelou. Celebrations include picnics, rodeos, street fairs, cookouts, family reunions, park parties, historical reenactments, blues festivals, and Miss Juneteenth contests. I gotta click on Miss Juneteenth to see what that is all about. Strawberry soda is a traditional drink associated with the celebration. The Muskogos, the descendant of the Black Seminoles, who resided in Quahia, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Mexico since 1852, also celebrate Juneteenth. I want to see what Miss Juneteenth is all about. Let's view the history of this page, because I have a feeling the history of this page is going to be pretty short. Looks like this page may have been created... it was created on January 26, 2020, so it was actually created earlier this year. So not completely new, but still pretty new. Miss Juneteenth is a 2020 American drama film written and directed by Channing Godfrey Peoples, and starring a couple of people. The plot follows a single mom and former teen beauty queen who enters her daughter into the Miss Juneteenth pageant. Interesting, cool. All right, so I guess the moral of the story is that basically America, not the greatest history. It is a very bloody history. A lot of things that a lot of people are not so proud of. But but I think that America is on the mend. You see, there's a lot of things that have become a lot better. We still have a very long way to go, though, of course. I think that there's lots of racism, lots of racial inequality that is, not only a result of the of what was happening back in the 19th century, mid-19th century, and the 18th century in America, but also just of institutions that are still around here today. So lots of calls for making lots of changes. Hopefully things are going to change. I foresee that our current president, who has done a terrible job of handling this current situation, he's just done an abysmal job of it, basically made a fool of himself. I foresee him losing this next election by, I don't know, 48 states, maybe. Like, I cannot imagine that anybody would want to vote for this guy after how poorly he bungled this, not only the protest, but also the coronavirus situation. Pardon me. Eric Gunnarsson, thank you for joining the stream. Always good to see you, man. Say hello to everyone. The USS Monitor was constructed by John Ericsson from Sweden. The Monitor was used during the Civil War and was one of the armored battleships, was one of the first armored battleships ever used. Yeah, I was reading about that. The fight between the Monitor and the other ship, whose name I cannot remember. Battle of the Monitor versus the Merrimack. There we go. Yeah, the Monitor and the Merrimack, that is one of those like bits of history that I was always super fascinated by, even though I wasn't big into history when I was younger. Basically because they did talk about, you know, these amazing engineering accomplishments of the Monitor and the Merrimack. Got a little bit of chocolate, a little bit of chocolate ice cream on my face. Yeah, that's super interesting. I didn't realize that it was designed by a foreigner, though. That's really cool. Manic tricks. I see. As you said earlier, idiocy spreads at the speed of light. Yeah, it's unfortunate that it's basically that ideas can spread at the speed of light nowadays. So yeah, I'm not super happy with it. I foresee that I have a feeling that eventually some kind of media training or something like that is going to become something that exists in primary school, just so hopefully so that children who are exposed to media can understand the way that it is very manipulative and just those different kinds of things. I think that's something that's very important. I think that's something that people should learn as early as like 10, 12 years old, when they start becoming a little bit more exposed to the outside world and everything like that. And you asked, did the slave owners get their deposit back? Man, I hope not. I hope they got a dope slap on the head or something even worse. I mean, anybody who thinks that it's okay to pay money for a human life doesn't deserve the time of day, let alone any deposit back for losing their slaves. I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's like, you know, if you buy illegal drugs and they're confiscated by the police, then yeah, you're not gonna like, the police aren't going to reimburse you for the drugs that they confiscated from you. Likewise, like. It's so, like, it even feels a little bit skeezy for me to make that analogy, because like basically I'm comparing an illegal commodity of a drug to what was essentially an illegal commodity of a human life back in 1865. So I think that what we're talking about, and one of the big discussions that have been becoming much more prominent in the United States in the last couple of years is the idea of reparations, which is actually the exact opposite of that, which is that slaves should have been reimbursed by their slaveholders. So there's this idea of what would a modern day reparation look like? How can African Americans who are descendants of slaves be, how can they be repaid, basically, to be put on more of an even footing with Caucasian Americans, with Asian Americans, with other American groups that, you know, are a little bit more well off and not privy to, or that don't have like institutional racism against them, basically, in their everyday lives. And like, I'm a little bit of two minds of this. Like, of course they deserve some kind of foot up, because they started like basically without a bunch of the privileges and a bunch of the leg up that somebody like me would have had. But on the other hand, like, it's a very complicated subject. I think that there have been a couple of states who've been instituting something like pardon me. Little bit of a frog in my throat. But some states have been instituting things like cheaper healthcare, things along those lines. So they'd have not repaying individuals particularly, but cheaper healthcare for African Americans, easier access to education for some African Americans, like institutional methods of like bringing forward reparations, basically. So instead of individuals getting reparations, like instead of the United States government or every single Caucasian individual writing a check to every single African American individual in America, we're talking about making these institutions to help African Americans as a whole, that kind of thing. And I think that's the right way to go about these, to give folks a leg up. I feel like if you're not careful and not thoughtful in the way that you would do something like that, then it might turn out looking a little bit like affirmative action, which affirmative action was like a great idea on paper, but ended up being executed a little bit poorly, I think, to put it lightly. That's another subject that I don't know a whole lot about. I just know that the results of affirmative action were not what was intended from the attempts to enact affirmative action. All right, guys. Well, I think that has been my day of heavy subject matter. I've got almost this entire bowl of ice cream done. I have not been eating enough during these lunchtime live streams. Oh, Manix Woods, you say your great-grandfather was a slave. Well, I'm very sorry to have heard that. I'm very sorry that has happened anyway. I hope that things do change so that they're a little bit better for African Americans. I hope that folks are able to be... I don't even know what the right solution is, so I'm not even sure what to say to that. Like, is it something that I should be sorry for? Is it something I should be sorry about? I don't know, man. That is a really tragic part of the history, and I don't like that it is a part of America, but I do hope that things change for the better. I hope that they continue to change for the better for everyone. I think one good example of this is like in the STEM fields. I will say that thinking about it, like when I graduated from college with my bachelor's degree, I was in a college that was very software engineering forward. And I think there was only one African American student in this college in my class of about 250 or 300 people. His name was Mario. And this was a class that was... this is a school that was very much centered around video games. So, he kind of joked that he was the black kid named Mario at Nintendo University, but he was a very cool guy. I liked him. But I think that the lack of representation of diversity in the, I should say specifically African Americans in STEM fields is quite unfortunate. So I would like to see universities and institutions open up to maybe be a little bit more accepting, maybe lower the bar, the financial bar for accepting African Americans into higher level learning. I think that would be great. I will say that currently in my electrical engineering class, I see plenty of not just African Americans, but also Africans. One of my classmates was actually an Ethiopian who came to America specifically to study electrical engineering. So I'm happy to see that there is a little bit more representation from African Americans in my current university that I'm at right now. So I don't know how it was at my previous university, DigiPen Institute of Technology. I do see a lot of representation of like South Asians and East Asian individuals. So it's not like a lack of diversity overall. It just seems like there is a lack of, it just does seem like there is a lack of representation from African Americans. Lottie Ray, am I reading that right? You're asking, is this live right now? Yes, this is live right now. I'm reading your comment right now. Thank you for joining the live stream. You can scroll back and watch the entire live stream if you like as well. So before I put my foot in my mouth again, making an even bigger chucklehead of myself than I'm sure I already have by speaking about things that I know very little about, I better turn this thing off. I'm very, very glad that for all of you guys who join me on these lunch live streams, I think it is great for my sanity to be able to hang out with you guys. I hope you enjoy the content. And it is the end of the week. So whether you're celebrating Juneteenth now, whether you're celebrating it on the third Sunday of June, which, is that this Sunday? I don't know. I don't even know. 1, 2, 3. Yes. This Sunday is the third Sunday. So if you are celebrating Juneteenth today, or if you're celebrating this weekend, that's excellent. I hope you do. Maybe get some strawberry soda. I didn't even realize that was a thing, so I'm definitely going to have to pick up some strawberry soda for myself this weekend. So again, thank you guys for joining me. I'm going to be here next week doing the same live stream starting around 12:15 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So until next time, peace out, and you guys take it easy and celebrate a wonderful Juneteenth.